Welcome to the Survivor's Chair podcast, a podcast where we break down our stories and our trauma, understanding how they have impacted our career and our life. This is a place where we break free from shame, own our truth, and step into our power, one story at a time. Hi, I'm Kim, an adoptee, a former foster youth, hairstylist, salon owner, breast cancer, and complex trauma survivor. So join us, pull up a chair, in this no sugarcoating, no holding back, honest conversation about healing and success. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 10 of the Survivor's Chair podcast. I can't believe that we're at episode 10 already. And this episode is probably going to be a little long. I have more notes than you possibly could imagine. And that's because I want to make sure that I get the information correctly. And this week, we're going to talk about the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn trauma responses. And you've probably heard those. And maybe you don't know what they mean, or maybe you have an idea of what they mean, or maybe you do know what they mean. But I thought this would be a good place for us to break it down. And I was going to include the nervous system in this podcast, but it would be 3 hours long. So I decided to do that one for next week. When we go through all of these trauma responses, which your nervous system is responsible for, we're going to go over that next week. So then you can understand the nervous system a little bit better. We've talked about it being regulated and dysregulated, and I'm going to go over all of that. And so you can understand that a little bit more. And the nervous system, even if it's dysregulated and you have these responses, it can be regulated. So we're going to go into all that. I have the next 3 podcasts planned, and it's all going to tie together. This week, we're going to talk about the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses, trauma responses. Next week, we're going to talk about the nervous system. The week after that is when I'm going to dive into the brain, like the brain. And as a hairdresser, I have spent more time than anyone should taking classes and courses with neuroscientists and understanding how the brain operates and works and what happens to it when we get traumatized. And the week after that, we're going to talk about the body and how the body stores all that trauma. And we're going to talk about ways that we can release that trauma through the body. All right, my friends. So on that note, I'm going to dive into all my notes. All right, so let's talk about fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And like I said, maybe you guys have heard of it. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you know all about it. Maybe you've heard it, but you don't know what it means. You're thinking, what the heck are those things? I don't get it. So I'm going to break them down because when I first started hearing them, I didn't really understand what they meant or where they came from. I heard a lot of you're in fight or flight or you're in survival mode. And, the other thing is we don't talk about the last one, fawn, enough. And we're gonna talk about all of them, but we're gonna really dive into that one a little bit because that one's a little bit different. We don't talk about it enough. So we'll start with the fight trauma response, body trauma response, nervous system response. It doesn't mean you're going to get into a fight, right? That's not what it means. We'll put the fight or flight in the same response for just a minute because that's what people put together all the time, fight or flight, fight or flight. It's a sudden, quick kind of automatic response from your body, from your nervous system when you have perceived danger. And I talked about before when people have been traumatized, children traumatized, everything is danger to us. So we always have this perceived sense of danger. Now, I'm going to talk about the difference between fight or flight and survival mode a little bit. My whole life, I would say it's been in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn a lot of times, but fight or flight, but more survival mode. So what does that mean? What's the difference? The difference is you have that fight mode and you have this perceived sense of danger. When you're in survival mode, your body stays in that chronic stress of that perceived danger. Your body is always tense and ready for danger at all times. That's survival mode. The fight and flight gets thrown together a lot, but I am going to break them down. Some of the things that could be happening in your body when we talk about that is when you get that perceived sense of danger, you might get like a fast heartbeat or that shallow breath that I talk about. That you might go into like a panic. That fight or flight is kind of it's a natural response. Like we're supposed to have that. Believe it or not, we're supposed to have that because it's really helpful if we are in an actual emergency or we are in danger. It gets us in that you got to get out of here, you got to run, you got to protect yourself. But the problem is when you're traumatized, you just don't know the difference. And that's everything. Like I said, everything is perceived as danger. So if you had a healthy, regulated nervous system, when you're driving in your car and somebody runs a stop sign and you quickly hit your brakes, that's that response that's protecting you from that danger. I'm going to give you a personal story about my having this fight or flight response, where it's kind of the one story that really sticks out in my head where I could see it for what it was. And it's kind of a funny story. So if you want to laugh along, by all means. I was hiking in Pennsylvania with Dave, and it was his first kind of hike to the top of the mountain. So we were early in our relationship. So, and for those hikers out there who know, when you get to the top of the mountain, you pick up a rock and you put it on a pile, and there's always this nice little pile of rocks that everybody, piles up at the top of a mountain. I forget what it's called. There's a name for it. And so we got to the top, we took our pictures, we're having a grand old time. And I said, well, you got to pick a rock and put it on the top of the pile. He's like, oh, all right. And I'm like, look at that pretty pink rock right there. You should take that one. So he says, all right, I'll take that one. And now the sun is kind of going down. So he's a little bit of like a silhouette and getting ready to go down the mountain. And he picks the rock up. And as he picks the rock up, I see these bees come out of the ground that I swear they were 1.5 inches long. And the way they're flying upwards, they're just kind of hanging straight down and they just look huge. And I don't really register what's happening until I see Dave go, ow, and brush his arm. And then I see him again go, ow. And then he brushes his leg. And I think, he's getting stung. This is a bee attack. I'm going to die. I need to run for my life. So when I talk about that panic and fear that came from my toes, and it catapulted me down that mountain at a marathon pace. And when I tell you my feet barely touched the rocks, I was bouncing from rock to rock. Normally, I would have been kind of crawling or whatever, or gingerly on the rocks, balancing myself, trying to get down. Oh no. I was bouncing, barely touching these rocks down, flying so fast. And I did feel something on my arm and I was like, ah. And yes, I did get stung on my arm. But I was running. And the funny part about it is Dave was running behind me and he had no idea what was happening. And he was screaming to me, stop, stop, stop. And I was not stopping. I felt like if you're like old school like me and you watch those cartoons and you would see the arrow behind the cartoon character that was all bees or whatever that was chasing the cartoon character, that was me. I felt like I had an arrow of these killer bees behind me that was going to kill me and I was going to die. So I'm running and he's screaming, stop, stop, stop. I could not stop. Finally, I don't know how long it was, but I finally stopped and he's like, what is going on? He's realized now that there's a swarm of bees and I pretty much left him at the top of the mountain for dead. So we have come to this understanding in our relationship that it's every man for himself. I'm probably not going to be the one that's going to save him if something like this happens again, because I am going to run for my life. So that is that quick sudden response to danger, yet mine was to the 10th power because it was fueled by trauma response too. So my nervous system was like, you are gonna die, you have to go. So we do laugh about it now, but at the time it wasn't very funny. And just for the record, I did get a major allergic reaction to the bee, and my arm looked like Popeye's arm. It was huge. So that was an experience. I now have an EpiPen for bee stings, and Dave knows that he has to fight for his own life because I'm not going to do it. So aside from that story, the problem with me, even at that time, when I was in this state, I was in the bee danger, shall we say, all the time. Life and death for me was at the forefront. That's always what I felt, because I had that fight or flight response, that fight response that I needed to protect myself and I needed to run. So that's the problem. The problem, I was in it all the time, which then puts you in survival mode, which is that chronic stress state for long, long, long periods of time. So what makes it chronic is when that response, that feeling of stress, or that I should say that fight response lasts way after the danger is gone. So if you've had something in your childhood that has triggered this response in your body, and that response is still there. It's survival mode. So let's break down fight a little bit more. Like I said, it doesn't mean that you're getting into a fight, although it could turn into that because of your protection, your need to protect, and your perceived sense of danger. But it's like you could have outbursts of anger, you can have control issues, you have this need to be dominant, and you have like this hyper independence of I'll do it myself. Again, hand raise here. You might feel tense, on edge a little bit. Your shoulders are up by your ears, your jaws are tight. We talked about those responses in other podcasts. Maybe you're snappy at the little things, like you got a short fuse, you lash out at people, or maybe you micromanage things, which gives you that sense of control, or you feel resentful, especially if you're not, or you don't feel like you're being heard. You're yelling because you don't feel like you're being heard. You defend yourself when it's not needed. You just get on that defense mode, or you blame others. Like when you feel overwhelmed, it's somebody else's fault. So that's kind of a little bit of the characteristics of fight. And let's go into flight, because like I said, everybody puts those kind of together. That can feel like you have anxiety, or your racy thoughts, or maybe you're panicky. You have the need to escape from that perceived danger or the real danger of the bees. You want to escape. You want to run. You have that urge to run. Running can look like many things. What looks like running is staying busy all the time, which you can be overworking because it feels unsafe to not be in motion, so you stay in constant motion. That's the thing with traumatized people too, to be still is very uncomfortable, and you'll find that same theme through all of these. You avoid conflict because conflict can feel dangerous, and that could be because of a real lived experience or that perceived danger of the conflict. You fill your calendar because you don't want any downtime. Again, it doesn't feel safe to have downtime. It gives you anxiety to be in the downtime, so you avoid it and fill your calendar with everything and anything. Maybe you obsessively clean or you organize, and a lot of times that's a sign that you're trying to cope with the chaos on the inside. You're trying to cope with that chaos that you feel on the inside, so the outside you're over organizing, or you're cleaning obsessively, and all of those things. It could look like you switch jobs all the time, you're in different relationships all the time, you change your environment all the time. When things get intense and your system is like, you gotta run, like you gotta get as far away from this as possible, and you in your mind you're thinking, I gotta get someplace safer, in your subconscious mind, because you don't really consciously know what you're doing. That's the thing about all this. When you're in the thick of it, you're really just not aware of what's happening, because it's really not only is it on a subconscious level, but it's in a body response level. It could also look like that flight, like everyone's against you, or they're like out to get you. I remember feeling like that a lot, like, why is everybody out to get me? You could react impulsively or aggressively when your boundaries are challenged. When you're traumatized, you put up these stiff boundaries that don't really make any sense. Nobody's getting in, nobody's getting out. And I actually write about that in my book. When somebody challenges those or goes to breach those, that puts you in danger. So if those are being challenged, you might just react on an impulsive way or an aggressive way. It's just basically your body feels threatened when any of these things are going on. Even if it's something really small, it feels big to your body and your nervous system. And like I said, I really want to get into that, but I am going to wait and get into that the next podcast. So you'll have to wait for that one. My plan is to try to break all of this down into very simple terms and ways. I've taken more classes and certifications in neuroscience and the brain than I think it's necessary for any hairdresser to take. I want to learn as much as I can to understand how the body works and how the brain works. And my plan is to learn all this and then bring it back in layman's terms so we can really understand it all together, because I'm still learning about it all. But I do understand my body a little bit better now. Our brain is always, always scanning for a threat. Even the smallest thing can feel like an attack to somebody who's been traumatized. And whatever boundaries that you've had to create for yourself because of that trauma, they were like everything else that we're talking about. They're just a way for you to feel safe and to survive. So the responses don't always mean aggressive. It's protective. They're there to protect us, like in a way of like, I need to be strong so I don't get hurt again. So staying busy or productive helps us feel safe. Basically, flight is abandoning or running from yourself and your emotions and your feelings because I don't feel safe. Slowing down is dangerous and doesn't feel safe. So that's where flight mode comes in. So let's go into freeze. And this is when you basically shut down. You're numb, you procrastinate, or you're disconnected, completely disconnected. You might feel like foggy, or you might just feel like you're stuck in some way. And the misconception of freeze, especially when you throw in procrastination, numb, shut down, all that stuff, the misconception is that it's laziness. And freeze is not lazy. It's I can't fight and I can't run, so I will disappear and shut down. And freeze looks a lot like, you're emotionally disconnected. You want to care, but your body has gone into a protective shutdown mode. So you might space out or disassociate during stressful times, and your brain just checks out to avoid overwhelm. So you just zone out or you go blank. Maybe you avoid decisions, even the little ones. This is when you feel stuck or you feel paralyzed by fear of doing the wrong thing or making the wrong decision. So you do nothing. And then there's procrastination. I'm probably the only person in the world that bought a book on procrastination that came with a DVD back in the day. I have no idea where that book went. I never read it. You don't buy a book on procrastination when you're a procrastinator. And now I know that that was just part of my trauma response. Procrastination is like either you wait till the last minute or you might not do it at all. So, but it doesn't mean you're lazy. Again, it means you're overloaded and you're going into shutdown mode. That's when shutdown mode looks like social media scrolling, Netflix binging, stuff like that, just really disconnecting. So maybe you go through the motions, but you're not present. You show up at that party, but you're not really there. You're not engaged. It could look like you're always exhausted, no matter how much rest you get. It may look like you can't speak or express yourself. Your throat tightens up. You can't find the words, or you just plain feel stuck in life and don't know how to get out. So you're just frozen. So freeze is like a pause button. It's another survival technique that the body uses. All right, so now we're going to talk about fawn. And this one I'm probably going to spend more time on than most because this is the one that I feel like is the most common and the most overlooked because it's almost socially socially acceptable, or it's, accepted as the norm, or that it's okay. It's a little bit invisible because it looks like you're kind and helpful and accommodating, but it's a response that's most of the time rooted in fear. So it falls pretty deep into the people pleasing mode, which is a mode of behavior. Fawn is a nervous system response. So that's the difference. All of these are a response from your nervous system. Like I said, next week, I'm going to break all that down so you can understand that a little bit better and how it all goes together. But people pleasing and fawn response looks the same, but the why behind them is very different. People pleasing can be learned through like social conditioning, like you want to be liked, stuff like that. And most likely you can change your boundaries or how you communicate, or you could just work on your confidence, which might make you feel uncomfortable, but you feel safe in your body. That's the difference. Where fawn is a survival mode. It's wired in the nervous system. It's more of, if I displease someone, I could be rejected, or I could be punished, or I'll be unsafe. So it's more than just uncomfortable. It's not uncomfortable. It feels life-threatening, especially to speak up or to say no. All right, so let's talk about some things that fall into the fawn mode. Saying yes when you want to say no. How many can relate to that? And that can be as simple as going to dinner with somebody, or giving up your day off, or giving somebody money or time, or, we can all relate to that. The reason why you do that is because you fear the conflict or the rejection that comes along with that. So you'll keep the peace at your own expense to avoid those things. It might look like you over apologize, even when you haven't done anything wrong. I'm sorry becomes a way to prevent the discomfort or the disapproval. I remember I had a customer, and she said, "I'm sorry and thank you" every 2 seconds. And that was before I was even aware of all this stuff. But I was like, wow, there's something behind that. Maybe you change your opinions to match others. I've done it, because you want to fit in, you kind of want to mold yourself to be liked or accepted. And again, most of the time we don't even realize we're doing this stuff, but we're doing it. We seek approval or reassurance because we just don't trust ourselves. That's a big one. And social media plays such a role in that. Here's my favorite one, and probably something I did. No, not probably. It is something I did my whole entire life, is stay in unhealthy relationships. Because feeling alone or losing a connection brought on more fear than being mistreated. The fear of me being abandoned and alone was bigger than being mistreated. Crazy, I know. You can read about that in my book. Trying to fix other people, trying to fix their emotions, or take responsibility for their pain, taking on people's suffering as your own. I have to say, I'm happy with the hairdressing world because I had to learn how to not take on other people's stuff. You couldn't get through the day if you did that, because your range of emotions that happened in the course of a day. You are celebrating somebody's marriage, to the next customer sharing their terminal illness, to the next one sharing that they're having a baby, to the next one sharing that they're getting divorced, to the next one that they just met the love of their life, to the next one their loved one is dying. So the range of emotions throughout the day in the life of a hairdresser was all over the place, and you had to learn not to take on other people's stuff and be able to kind of shed what was happening and the stories and the emotions of the person that was in your chair before the next one sat in your chair. Because I didn't want to be carrying that terminal illness to the one celebrating their baby. You can't. You have to be able to switch gears. So that was a learned thing, which I think did help me with that a little bit. I was always going to fix people and save people. That was definitely my thing. So maybe people describe you as so nice. Oh, so accommodating and so low maintenance. It's probably because you're putting your needs and your wants on the bottom of the list, if they're even making it on the list. I mean, that was me to a T. I was always so accommodating. And let's face it, I was all of the other ones I just went through too. So in Fawn, it feels like if you just stay small, helpful, agreeable, then you won't be abandoned or hurt. If that resonates, let me know. But those are all the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn in a nutshell. Maybe you can resonate with one, maybe you can resonate with all four, and that's okay because I can relate to all of them. All of these have shown up in my life one time or another or all at once, which is normal for a lot of people. A lot of people can relate to pretty much all of them on some level. But you know what the best part of all of these are? Is because they come from the nervous system and because they're a response from your body from the nervous system, and it's a response that your nervous system is dysregulated, the nervous system can be regulated. And you can get out of all of these modes. And you can, at the very least, work on them and manage it and have a much more relaxed nervous system. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. But I thought, it was just a little too much for this week all at once. So let's break it up a little bit. But I am going to say, if you have listened to all that and you find yourself activated, you find yourself kind of panicky or anxiety provoked, or you're feeling fear, or even you feel like, I'm just going to shut down and disassociate right now, take a minute to calm your nervous system. I'm going to give you this little breathing thing, and I might have said it in another podcast, but it's one of my favorite things to do if I'm driving or I just came out of some stressful, I don't know, conflict or something. I can feel my body when it gets dysregulated now. So I can feel when I need to do this. And I will do this breathing technique where I will take a deep breath. I will breathe in for 4 seconds. I'll hold it for 4 seconds. And then I will exhale for 4 seconds. And you can do this 5 times and you can feel yourself start to calm down. And if you feel like you need to do it more, do it more. Don't do it until you get lightheaded, or if you get lightheaded, stop for a second and start over again. But it really does calm that nervous system when you're in that moment. Like when I'm feeling jacked up or disconnected or something like that, that's when I'll do these breathing techniques. I have other things too that we're going to talk about a couple podcasts from now when I start talking about the body. And that's going to be really exciting, and how you can reconnect with your body and you can feel safe in your body again, because that's really what it is. We just don't feel safe in our body. And then after that, I'm going to get into the brain and how it works, and when it gets disrupted, when we have an experience of trauma. And I know this stuff is a really long way from being a hairstylist or a salon owner, but this stuff creeps into our life, our business, and our relationships without us even knowing it. Once we become aware, as I say, awareness is 90% of the solution. The other 10% is doing the work. So once you're aware of what's happening, once you're aware of what's going on in your nervous system and your body and your brain and all those things, it's going to start to click. And then you're going to realize that you can make the changes. You can change. You can feel safe. I promise you, you can feel safe again. So my friends, I will leave you on that. Couple of little updates. And by the time you listen to this, I will be finishing up at the Pennsylvania Beauty Pros Expo, which I'm sure is going to be fantastic. And I will be on to my next venture, which will be with Brad from Beauty Industry Cruises. And I will be bringing all of this goodness on his wellness cruise that heads to the Bahamas January 25th to February 1st. It will be me and some other amazing educators in the beauty industry and beyond, talking about wellness and healing and self-care and all of those things. And I'll talk more about that as time goes on. And I will also put the links in if anybody wants any information about that. If any of my friends out there listening that want to be educators, somebody who wants to mix a little vacation in with a little healing and wellness. It's not just for beauty professionals, although it really is a great way if you're going to take your team on a trip. or take your team to an educational thing, it would be great. As always, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. Thank you for the feedback, and thank you for challenging me on some of these subjects and things, because I welcome that and I appreciate it. And I think, if anything, this podcast gets a conversation started, then that's all we have to do. Get curious. Life is about curiosity and learning new things and conversations. And we don't have to agree on things, but I do think having conversations and being curious changes everything. So, if you would like to, or if you could, I'm going to ask you if you could leave a review on this podcast on Spotify or Apple. Give it a 5-star if you feel like it deserves 5 stars, because that bumps up the podcast a little bit so that other people can see it. And I think the more people we can get to listen, the more people it can help. And that's really what my mission is all about. So if you feel compelled, please, that would be amazing. So, all right, my friends, I will see you on the next episode of the Survivor's Chair podcast. Thank you for tuning into the Survivor's Chair podcast. You can head over to my website, www.kimrussellpro.com. That's KIMRUSSELLPRO.com. You can catch up on my blogs. Follow me on social, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or TikTok. All the links will be in the show notes, and I'll see you next time in the Survivor's Chair.